Good evening. Welcome to the May 20th, 2019 meeting of the Grafton Planning Board. First item on our agenda is public input. Is there any public input? Apparently not. Action items. Draft decision, 80 Worcester Street.
Okay, so let me just pull things up.
Let's go my glass.
And did everyone have receive a copy?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
I also saw it online, although I think I looked at what you emailed.
I'm just bringing up the Word version, so if I have to make any changes, I can do it right to the doc.
I was a little baffled by the way the down towards the bottom, the record of vote and some of that stuff, and the way it was written or drafted was a little odd, and I'm gonna need a little help with that.
So probably in this with the record of vote, I think I addressed it in the site plan because it would be basically the same thing. Where we say that through the public hearing, Mike was there, but then because of resigning, did not participate in the vote. I think I, on like the background where I basically just end with the following people were present, I just forgot to do the rest.
Let me, that wasn't exactly what, let me see, maybe it was the other thing that I looked at.
Yeah,
No, I think it was this one.
yeah, this is the special permit for sign relief.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
and none of us were very friendly to it.
I think we all agreed that we.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
we have record of vote, and then we have down below something that shows the vote.
You're on the last page or second to
Yeah,
last.
Well, record of vote starts on the next to last,
Yeah.
and it has, the way that's written, you know, with the ayes and, either we don't say which way they voted until we take the vote, or we have aye/nay, or it shouldn't look like it's pushing one way or the other.
Right. I mean,
doesn't-
but
you
it
know,
was.
doesn't-
It was.
It's not gonna
yeah.
matter after we vote.
I mean, but at that meeting, the board did vote to deny the application.
All right, then it ought to, I don't know that it says that happened at, a particular meeting.
Yeah.
We instructed.
We closed the hearing?
We had closed the hearing that
Yeah.
night. Yeah. So, I mean, that's where you can see above with the decision and conditions where I had the
Yeah,
approve, deny
there's
type
votes
thing.
too. Okay, May 20th.
I just didn't get to sort of do it in that form down below in the
At
record.
their
of vote.
meeting, blah, 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 blah. So if we say at their meeting of such and such a day, then why do we have to have record of vote below it? It's just a little confusing.
Yeah.
The other thing was, I'm not sure whether we said, or whether we ever say, we must say, when the hearing closed. One of these that I looked at, I don't think said,
And that's under section 1 background.
hearing was closed on the 22nd.
Yep.
Okay, and that's, okay. Looks okay to me.
Yeah, I didn't find any.
Just one typo,
Yep. Where?
my name,
Again. Where? What?
throughout the document. It's Carol is with 2 R's and 2 L's.
It's easy to just change the way you spell it.
Yeah.
You know?
That's my maiden name. I'm not gonna change that. I didn't even change that when I got married.
Well, some people don't even do a hyphen. They just, some women, you know, Ken Crater's wife,
Yeah, I kept it original. A lot of people do that now.
yeah, that's a lot of changes.
Yeah. I was, like I deal with different names and different nationalities in Grafton, working at the water
Sure.
district. And I was very, I don't know why I was surprised about it, but it's because I don't understand the culture. But Indian, you know, from India, they keep their original names. They don't take the, there might be cases where they are, but the majority of them keep their own name.
Yep. Okay.
So, Bob, just to let you know, while the hearing was closed and it's really up to the board to take any testimony, Marcella just came in to the meeting room. I don't know if you.
I'll go back to public input for a moment.
Okay. So, Marcella, we are reviewing the decision where from when we last spoke, the board had identified that it closed the hearing, was going to deny the application. Did you want to say anything, or are you here for the economic development meeting that's talking about signs?
What can I say about the other one?
You mean as far as the application on the physical sign out front by the street?
Right.
I just wanted to, only because you came in, I didn't know if you wanted, if you were intending to ask any questions or regarding that decision, or whether there was something else.
Oh, yeah, I mean,
Well, if you're gonna have anything to say, you're gonna need to
Can't
come to
even
one
hear
of these two microphones. And since the hearing is closed, it doesn't count as testimony on the
right,
case.
right. So I was not able to be there due to certain circumstances, so I didn't know, I wasn't there to hear what you had to say.
So essentially what happened was that the zip code where we sent the hearing notice and the time was for 01519. And as you cross Carroll, that becomes 01536. So the post office rejected it being delivered. And so she never got notice that we even had the public hearing.
Well, it was advertised though. I thought that actually the zip code line for a ways there went down the middle of Worcester Street.
No.
One side is the one and the other side is the
No,
other.
essentially the
'Cause I saw a map.
VFW is 19, and then Peralt is the 36, and then going forward. So what we equate as sort of very close to here is a different zip code. So I had reviewed with Marcella the hearing, the issues that the board had as far as Mr. DeFreitas being the owner, and that it's something that benefits him, and that he should be in front of the application have more of an active role, and all the things that were discussed with the board.
You've seen what's in this draft decision, and because those were the things we discussed, and
I actually haven't seen anything.
she hasn't seen. Well, okay.
Sorry.
The decision explains in some depth all the issues. I mean, they're just. It's not a case that we can grant relief for.
I mean, I just thought it was a great idea because I was trying to solve the,
Yeah, I know,
the
I know, but-
situation, and I didn't know how else to solve it but
Right.
to
Well,
put it on the bottom, and I thought it was a great idea. So I was kind of surprised it
the-
got turned down.
what we have is that sign already exceeds the limits. It's already in violation of the zoning bylaw. And in any case, as Joe said, the sign owner, not you,
Right.
would be the one that would need to come in. Basically, it comes down to it's between you and him.
Yeah, I just don't understand how it could be already in violation because he has 10 businesses, and right now
It's
he
got
has
to
6.
do with the square area. For a certain amount of frontage, you get so many square feet of sign, and he's got significantly over that amount already. And
'Cause even
there's
if
actually a mention of there being a sign space that's not, on the sign that's not being used. I don't know whether that's true.
Well,
It
all I
still
know
is.
is that there was a person moved in just prior to me, and supposedly they said that they just applied for a permit just recently, but he's been in there as long as me. It's been like 5 months. I don't
well-
know. He said what he's doing with that empty spot.
It's the sign owner's responsibility to deal with the sign.
But the thing is, the thing I understand, he doubled up on 2 of them, so that would only equal six businesses, even with the double up. But he has 10, so I don't understand. He'd have to make even the sign even taller.
Yeah.
And if it's already exceeded, even how would he even make it taller? I mean, how is it even possible?
And I think that's where ultimately, and it was something that we discussed at the counter where the applicant is in the position to, because he's the one that benefits, to make alterations to the mixture as far as the existing signs for tenants, and if there is any empty spaces, to reshuffle the board essentially. He also is the one that is able to come up and expand the structure. And being the property owner and the one to benefit all of that, he's the board had determined that he was the one that should have been making the application. He should have been coming in to request and why this additional space is needed, rather than leaving it to the tenant to make that case. I wasn't present when it occurred, but the board had informed me that it was like 10 years ago at the Stop and Shop Plaza where the same request came in from a tenant to increase the size, and the board had determined that the application wasn't properly before the board because the applicant had no way of, because he did not own the sign, to make structural changes. Like the board could have, let's say just theoretically, approved it, but said, you need to be the main structure. And that would have been forcing a situation where the applicant would have then been responsible for physical changes that would have benefited the owner of the sign. So it was for those reasons that the board ended up denying the application, and within the decision basically stating that the applicant, the board finds the applicant does not own the existing sign, and that the owner should have been the person making the application to the board, since the board's decision would benefit the owner of the sign and the permitted dimensions of the sign. So that Ed should have been in here sort of supporting you in doing that, but rather than just leaving it on your shoulders to then ask for a increase in sign area that's displayed, but no increase in where that the main portion is, and that the sign was also on the structural support, which the bylaw does not specify that is a proper location for putting sign.
Well, I've discussed it since then, and I mean, I don't know what to do because he's refusing to do anything. So I don't understand. Nothing I can do.
That's that's between you and him.
Right.
So, and I do understand that you were talking at least to Mr. Berger about applying for a compliant sign on the building to at least get signage on the building. That does not come in front of the board because it would be coming in under the existing zoning bylaw provisions, which then allow him to issue a permit as long as it meets the zoning bylaw.
Yeah, he was agreeable with that. It was just fixing the sign better or bigger for all the people. He just has no interest in doing that. So I don't know what to do on that. I guess I can't do anything.
Right.
So.
Sorry.
Yep.
But I know that John was reaching out to business owners to sort of talk about signs, and I think they're upstairs in room F. I don't know if John was our economic development person. I don't know if maybe you had also heard from him. He had sent things. So I just wanted to make sure that depending on where you wanted to be, there was those two meetings that were occurring.
Yeah, that's the other one.
Yes.
Today?
You might want to look in on it.
So that's upstairs, right?
Upstairs and finance. So you have the main stairs in the middle of the building. You go up, and then the door is directly opposite that.
Oh, okay. So I just happened to land here at the, thinking that was it.
Yep.
Ended up talking about this. Okay. All right. Good enough.
Okay.
Good luck.
So, anything more on the decision?
No.
I didn't have any issue with the way it was written.
No?
I will support Sharon's recommendation to spell her name the way she wants it.
It's
Well
Thank
done.
you.
Do we need to take a vote on that? No.
no roll call. You need to do the edits by roll call.
Oh. Well, we're not going anywhere until I have a motion from somebody about something.
Let's see, I suppose, so we've already voted on the findings. We've already, What's left to vote on?
Yeah.
The approval, to vote on the denial?
But we only voted on
Yes.
closing the hearing and denying it. We actually,
So it says here, under findings, that we voted the findings on April 22nd. Is that correct?
No, that should have been tonight's date.
Okay.
Okay, I was a little bit. All right, so we will use our standard form motion on this then. Move that the board find on the findings F1 through F10 as drafted, that the board deny the special permit with the decision as drafted with the changes noted during the discussion.
seconded.
Moved and seconded, discussion. Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? So voted unanimously. Note, I just noticed under record of vote, it says 5-0.
Yep, I just corrected all those.
So we'll correct
Okay.
all the details of the votes.
Yeah, sort that out. Okay, moving on. Planning board endorsement of an Institute Road layout.
Pretty straightforward. So if you may recall when we did that A&R a number of years ago, and we were discussing with Village Institute establishing a 60-foot right-of-way at town meeting. Town meeting did vote to accept that layout as a truly town way now with meets and bounds, all that fun stuff. So on the form, on the Mylar is actually the place for the planning board and then board of selectmen to sign so that we can record everything. Everything is in line with what the board had approved way back when. The difference is that it took this long to work through DCAM legal. So, but that would be something that if the board wanted to just endorse, it would be later on.
I don't think I remember us endorsing layouts like that. Usually, we sign subdivision plans, but,
Yeah.
and they're creating new roads, but this is the case of, I don't know, declaring a.
Yeah, I mean, we ended up doing it when we established the A&R that then carved off the 40 acres with whatchamacallit, with DCAM land that then went to mass development, and we were negotiating with them as far as where that that layout and where along the center line it ended up being. So because the A&R and then Institute Road subdivision coming in front of us, and also because the engineer had put it on the plan, I don't think there's anything that prevents us from signing it. I don't think there's anything necessary that.
Doing it.
What?
I just don't remember doing it, and I think this is a different category from the usual.
It's essentially because planning boards are able to lay out right-of-ways for future streets. I can always check with Ginny to see if it's improper, and we can sign it and then withhold it and ask them to print a new one if it's not supposed to be done.
How many sheets are there?
2.
Why don't we do it?
Well, yeah,
Because
but
it'll give Sharon a
We don't
chance to
necessarily,
sign.
you don't want to do it right this instant, right?
No, we can wait until the.
Well, if we
But
wait till the end,
it's only
she's not gonna
3.
be
It's
here.
only 3. It does it.
It only requires 3?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay, so we'll deal with that
at the end.
somewhere later. All right, I have a reflection on the 2019 special and town meeting articles. I wanted us to have a chance to just touch on a little bit there. I noticed, I'm particularly thinking of the Farnsville Mill, or the South Grafton VMU amendment. I noticed during all the discussion, there seemed to be a fair amount of expectation that somehow that would move forward and be done the right way, or at least the customary way. And then today, the Grafton News posted a letter from someone who made a nice statement about the situation, which is also hoping that the select board and the board of, the planning board and the, I guess the town, find a way to do something there. I'm just, I'm not sure that that the planning board wants to just dive right into that without having some sort of interaction and input from the selectmen, from the administration, from economic development, from whatever sources. So it's not just us getting this idea. Also, they need to put in, since they didn't like what we had, what would they like? Or what are the parameters?
Sorry, are you referring to we're talking about the mill, right?
Well, we're talking about the South Grafton VMU.
Well, that passed.
No, the South Grafton VMU,
Allowing.
The marijuana
Okay,
cultivation.
Okay, yeah,
marijuana.
yeah.
the use table change.
Okay, yeah.
So anyway, in terms of expectations,
Yeah, for what it's worth, my thoughts going forward on that would be to explore, you know, and not in isolation. I think I agree with the notion that we you know, we should be working with the EDC and the select board and potentially other interested parties. But my thoughts going forward would be to explore ways to modify the zoning, I guess specifically for that VMU. I don't know that there's any place else that it might be applicable, but the idea would, yeah, you know, but the idea in my mind is to explore whether we can find a way to modify the zoning so that that mill building can be reused for most any purpose for which it might be appropriate. I mean, the one we had in front of us was a very specific operation that the owner has some prospect of actually doing, but potentially there are some other things that could be done in there, and the mill building kind of doesn't really fit well with the rest of the VMU. So I'm wondering if there isn't something that we can explore, some way to make the zoning more compatible with that particular building while preserving VMU in general there.
well, one thought that came to me, well, first of all, there was a suggestion from one of our select board members about extending the OLI district down there or something. I looked at the map, but I don't see that. And then it defeats the main reason we created the VMU, which was to make better circumstances in that area. I did have a thought, though. Maybe you can have an overlay district for the mill, maybe the traditional group of buildings there, more or less, that would do different things for it than for others. But
Yeah, that's kind of what I was, along the lines of which I was thinking, was it, you know, without having any particular ideas to propose, you know, that's sort of the same thing. In principle, that's kind of what I'm thinking, is that we find a way that works with the zoning there to make it feasible for that building to be reused in a way that's kind of fits with that particular building.
Yeah, and so I just brought it up on just to show the board. You know, I know it was stated at town meeting. Oh well, just from across the street, extend the OLI. The OLI is way down here.
that's my point.
Even the sewer department is on residential land. You know, you do have, once you get into this area, you have the core buildings that were sort of the whole Farnhamsville area, including the old sort of the rec center where you had the bowling alley and all those things. So you have a complex of mill buildings that are currently not being used for a use that is consistent with village mixed use. So one of the things that we did, I sort of in passing mentioned
Sorry.
at the meeting where Mr. Hebe just sort of presented, like, here's the petitions article, is that, you know, we could always reevaluate some sort of mill-oriented zoning, and that could address the areas around a mill. It doesn't have to be only the mill, but it could be some of those supported structures so that, we're going to be, we potentially could be dealing with this exact same thing. Maybe not now, but, the 86 zoning still lays our decisions. So, we're past, 30 years worth of, that dictating land use policy. So we could easily envision creating something to go around Washington Mills or some of the other areas even in North Grafton that maybe it's like, well, it's not going to be done now, but zoning doesn't work on the here and now necessarily. It's also looking towards the future. And the question ends up being, if you zone it village mixed use, and it's like, okay, well, you can have residential, you can have retail, you can have office, and that's it. If for some of these, if there is a form of light manufacturing, if there's a form of maker space where people are looking for incubator space for whether it's electrical engineering, either pharmaceutical or even producing food products. There's some multiple things that in an old mill building might be appropriate. And just to sort of say, well, we're going to treat it just like sort of the rest of that village area where we want it a little bit more controlled. There's a lot more potential in these mill buildings than even what the village mixed use, with the flexibility it has, that might be appropriate in a larger building. So I think that it may be worthwhile having another discussion with some of those other boards, and especially once we get past the election, that would probably be a good time to sort of have a little summit as far as some of these things. Because I know talking to Tim today, we were talking about having Board of Selectmen, Affordable Housing Trust planning, also talking about where to go with affordable housing and projects. And if the Affordable Housing Trust was given land, what from a town process that would look like, and how do you bring about input from different boards. So it might be possible to outreach, especially after tomorrow, to then have a larger discussion, and this can be just part of it.
Yeah, well, for my, as far as I'm concerned, we need a push from outside of our board.
Yeah.
And some sort of a pretty good consensus about the appropriateness and the need and the direction to move.
Yeah, this sort of a side note to this particular discussion, but this touches on something that's sort of a growing concern in my mind, is the mismatch between the zoning and the actual current land use. That all too often it seems that the zoning was done without really sufficiently taking into account the way things currently are and are likely to stay for some time, particularly the commercial uses that are in residential zones and residential uses in commercial zones.
You mean like Cumberland Farms?
Well,
Thought I'd throw that dig in there.
yeah. Did you say you were leaving soon?
So that's a larger topic, and there's only so much we can practically do about that.
But every
But we
time
can look for opportunities like that where it really might make sense to match the zoning better to what's there.
Well, every time that you put in a zoning bylaw and map, you have this problem. Unless you're starting in green fields.
Which we are. By and large, which we are not.
Right. I remember a place down in Maryland that got built. What was that called? Out near Dallas Airport, and another one between Baltimore and Washington, where they
built a city.
and they drew a city on a piece of flat land, more or less flat land, and built it. But we don't get to do that around here.
We don't have that luxury, for sure.
No, out in Las Vegas, they just draw some more lines in the sand and more streets. No, so that happened in the 50s when the first zoning came in. That definitely happened in 86. And some of the things we've been doing here, the VMU, what we're talking about right now, are trying to fine tune and soften, round out the fitting issues. Because back in those days, you didn't think you had overlay districts, and you know, we're getting more and more tools. Okay,
So we'll see what we can do with this one.
okay, it's, half past, which brings us to the library site plan.
Okay, so where we left things, and I think we have Ken here. Where we left things is that we were waiting for some documents to sort of finalize with conservation. They were awaiting some final peer review. The one thing that had changed was that Exhibit 24 was submitted, and that's essentially the final planting plan. And I'm just going to bring it on the screen, which then does sort of talk about that walkway that's getting closer to that wetland area. Conservation, my understanding, is also meeting tomorrow night. Hopefully everything will be finalized there as well. So we kept the public hearing open in order to receive final documents, but staff was asked to prepare a decision as well. So the decision has been distributed to the board. This is the last official plan that was sort of outstanding when we last met, because there was an option A and an option B, and this is the one that Ken had said was submitted. There was one other exhibit that realized was not in the board's packet for this, and that was the actual written decision from town council regarding this review and why it is site plan review in front of the board.
Yeah, I thought I hadn't seen that when I found it.
I had related, and then all of a sudden, as I'm going through writing the decision, I'm realizing where's that letter, and that's where.
Yeah, and I remember at the start of this process where you had explained that town council had determined that this was most appropriately done by site plan review.
But there was more detail than I
It was
remember.
more, yeah, there was more detail, because basically that if the library wanted to push it, they could probably claim Dover, and then we'd be arguing. But that, and this is my experience in other communities, that site plan review is an excellent, when we are dealing with Dover uses, is an excellent platform to make sure that, one, the public is informed as far as what the impacts are. The board and the community then have a public arena to review and make sure everything and everyone's concerns are heard and addressed. And that, three, we have at the end of the process a agreed upon final action, and that, especially as we undergo construction, any complaints as far as that will come in, we have a way of holding that to a standard. That's how the decision is drafted, just like similarly where there is a stage as far as requirements before the issuance of a building permit, erosion controls, all those things. I did ask as a condition to have one unified set, because we do have a number of plans that stay the same from the original, but then others that are altered, so that just one concise set, so that everyone can be dealing with that, because we do distribute those copies to other departments like DPW, building, fire, engineering, and then lastly, just making sure that there's a mechanism for inspections during construction. So we were just waiting for like those last minute things to come in case there was a significant change that was resulted, but realistically there wasn't, since they just chose that final planting plan.
Yeah, so as of now, we have every reason to believe that
Correct.
this is a plan that will be approved by conservation.
Yes.
Yeah, they basically voted in favor of the project as designed with, they had some conditions associated with it.
Which is pretty typical.
which is-
that-
yeah,
that
I
They
mean,
will
it
apply
was the-
appropriate conditions for them, but the plans we now have before us are the
Are the correct
plans that
ones, yes.
are going to be approved by conservation with whatever conditions they choose to impose.
Right.
So you're not worried about us approving this plan and then having them do something?
No, the conditions were things like, because we were reclaiming or not reclaiming, but basically converting land to wetlands.
Replicating.
And we were going to disturb the area. They were wondering how that would be maintained, and so it was agreed that we would have a plan to weed that area. And so, you know, one of the things we talked about doing was having a little sign would maybe show the invasive species that needed to be removed, so it could be used as an educational tool as well. But it was things like that they wanted incorporated.
Is there anyone who wants to speak on this application? Because we're closing in on closing the hearing and perhaps rendering a decision. No one.
So hearing no further comment from either the public or the board, I will move that this public hearing be closed.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So voted.
And we have a draft decision to work with, which we can presumably either handle now, or if you prefer. Till
I think
later in
that
the meeting.
we should do it now.
That's right, Sharon.
Because I have to leave.
So there were two things that I had highlighted, and I did receive that information by email. Just specifically, this is in finding 6, specifying the amount of the building in square feet that will be demolished, the size of the addition, and then the total. So I did receive that from the architect. So that I'm just going to fill that in. So that's the one piece of information that was just waiting for. And if you saw those 3 yellows, that was what that was.
I noted that. I assumed that you were going to be obtaining those numbers.
Yep.
I did not see anything else in my review of this draft decision that I thought I'd.
No.
I looked at a decision today that had some kind of typo in it. And maybe we should, just when we vote, say, if there's any typos, fix it, something like that. It was a small typo, like a sentence that didn't quite end or something,
Oh, I found it. That there.
where,
It was right in this. It was THRE. I just that there is parking currently adjacent. This would have been waiver to section 4232.
Yes, due to the limited.
at the end of that
Offloading and delivery,
offloading of library deliveries,
comma, the
Oh.
board what?
Yeah.
The board what? Yes.
I didn't want to put any words in your mouth.
Yeah, we probably should complete.
the other
this.
27 pages, you don't
Exactly.
mind.
That they're parking adjacent,
Yes,
and
come
due
to
to
think
the
of it, I
limited
did
nature.
notice that when I was reading, and then.
Oh, it
slipped
would
my mind.
basically would be. I'm just looking if I can just steal from something above. Due to the limited nature of loading and offloading of library deliveries, no, the waiver is granted based on the library being in the corner lot and that the Upton Street grants its frontage, both front yard lots, that there is parking adjacent to Upton Street, and due to the limited nature of the offloading of library deliveries. I think that's it. Just a period after the comma.
Okay.
Yep, that would work.
Ah.
Otherwise, we have to come up with something the board wanted to say about.
Well, because then it's saying that the waiver is granted because, and then we're continuing with more because.
Yeah,
So,
that,
So,
I think that works.
all right.
All right, so, with that, move that the board find favorably on findings 1 through 11 with the insertion of the required numbers, that the board grant the request for waivers. We already voted on 1, didn't we? The traffic.
yes.
So I'll
That's
move-
why I have it as at their 6th meeting,
Yes.
and
So
then,
that's why I thought we already voted. So my motion will be to grant the requested waivers from section 1.3.3.3E and 4.2.3.2. That the board approve the site plan with conditions A 1 through 6, B 1 through 3, C 1 through 3, and D 1 all as drafted with any editorial corrections that may be noted. That, with the corrections noted this evening and any other editorial corrections that may be noted.
Seconded.
Moved and seconded. Discussion,
Nice complicated motion.
whatever. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, so voted. So now, when are we gonna see some work being done? I
They
haven't
start
even-
work
I haven't
tomorrow and
even
get it done
seen
by the end of the
fencing
week.
put up or nothing.
Nothing. No, there's no, the library moved out.
I know.
Okay, thank you all very much. Yeah.
Thank you. Moving on, Meadowbrook Manor.
So I have to leave, you guys.
Okay.
Not
Well,
required, right?
Th-
Yeah.
This is your last meeting.
Yes, it is.
Thank you for all of your service.
You're very welcome. It's been a learning experience. I have learned a lot about government in Grafton as well as Grafton. And I'm gonna miss that. 'Cause,
And we will miss you too, Sharon.
Yeah,
you're-
Thank
absolutely.
you very much for all the time you put into
You're
this.
very welcome. Thank you for all your guidance. So, Joe, I have the iPad
Okay.
right here.
You want us to recycle that material for you?
Sure.
Okay, great.
There you are. Thank you. That. Good luck. Thank you. Good man. See you guys.
Yep.
So, and before we get started on Meadowbrook, just a question for poll of the audience, whether anyone is here for the ridings. Just to let you know, the board did receive a request from the applicant to continue it to June 10th. One of the things, as you may have just seen, we only have 3 members that are here on the board. There's an election tomorrow for Sharon Seed, who just left, and we have 2 other vacancies. Because of that, and knowing that we need a full contingent of the board and 3 members of that board to move forward, the applicant has requested of the planning board that we continue to the 10th and also re-advertise. So you will be getting another notice, and all of the abutters will get another notice saying that, oh, here's a re-advertisement of the riding, so that we can start that process somewhat over, because we're all familiar with it. But because we will then have 2 new members that will participate, we actually have to start that record over. So if anyone is here for the ridings, just at least want to mention that.
Thank you.
At some point, we need to officially vote to continue doing that.
Continue.
That hearing.
We need to vote to grant the applicant's written request to continue that hearing.
Was that a
At
motion?
some point. If you want to do it now, I'll make
Why
that a
not?
motion.
Yeah.
Move that the board grant, this is for the ridings, that the board grant the applicant's written request to continue the hearing to Monday, June 10th, 2019 at 7:30 PM.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, so voted.
Okay.
Now we can move on to Meadowbrook Manor.
Mike's all yours.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, my name is Andy Baum from Summit Engineering, here on behalf of Sugar Realty Trust. The 2 applicants that were here at the last hearing were unable to attend as they are traveling right now. But in lieu of that, we prepared some revised drawings and a response memo to Graves Engineering Review. That application package was submitted, I believe, on Thursday of last week. And we addressed all the comments from Graves with the exception of the fire truck test. So last Wednesday, the fire truck was going to drive up the driveway. It was not able to do that at that time until Friday, at which time they brought their ladder truck over, Joe. I don't know if you received any communication.
I
from
haven't
the fire
received
department.
anything now.
The short story is the truck, when it went onto its approach, the rear end of the truck was starting to touch the pavement on Meadowbrook Road. So the one major outstanding item that we would have on that list from Graves, I think, is item number 3 that you have right there. With regards to addressing how we change some of the geometry on the entryway, we still will be requesting some waivers, most likely. But I think we can get the geometry to work such that when the rear tires go down, the front tires are a little bit lower, and we'll kick the rear end of the truck back up. But I would like, if the board or the public had any questions to try to address before we go too far into other review comments.
So it, and again, I haven't talked with anyone or received any correspondence from the fire department. So as you came in, that top end starts going up at a higher because you're dealing with the existing grades, forcing that back end to almost scrape against
Right.
the
And
meadow.
I believe when I was speaking with Mr. Flynn, there's some history with regard to that road. It was resurfaced a few years ago.
Yes.
There was an apron change at the driveway to address because he was having issues with his RV or motorhome. That was repaired at some point in time, but obviously with the different geometry of that ladder truck, it wasn't repaired enough.
You know, if I recall correctly, when they built the new fire station, they got the driveway wrong.
Yes.
They couldn't get that engine out without touching. They had to. I know they made some changes in the geometry. It seemed to me that it's the radius and of the the transition.
Yeah.
You've got to be.
In full disclosure, I worked for the company that worked on that fire station quite a while ago.
So you.
I wasn't responsible, actually, and ended up leaving before the construction was underway. But that truck is a non-spec truck, which is kind of funny that we live in a very hilly terrain and we have a vehicle that doesn't quite meet the terrain. But what's happening is we have a very short wheelbase, and it looks like they have an added extension on the back of the truck. So when your front wheels go up and your rear wheels are down, it's just like a big lever. I believe we can address it, and we're trying to, again, stick with the overall premise of this project is we're not trying to maximize the development of the property. We're trying to utilize all the existing infrastructure that's there and not get into making a very large earth disturbance project to support a couple lots.
I can't remember where I seem to remember something about waivers for the leveling area there, which is essentially
Well,
closely related.
they're related, but the subdivision control bylaw has, and I don't quote me, but it has a 3% leveling area for 150 feet or something quite substantial. So what would happen if we were to follow that bylaw? We'd have about a 6 or 8 foot cut that we'd have to attenuate for.
There's also what a K factor or something.
Yes,
It's
the
been
vertical
25
curves.
years since I looked at that.
Yeah.
But the K factor is what I'm talking about. How
The K factor is
think it's-
mostly related to sight distances.
yeah
It has to do with the change in gradient.
but
That's the
it's sort of you got to have gentler curves.
Yeah, and it's mostly related to sight distance because what happens with too long of a K or too short of a K, when your headlights, if you're going into a
Right.
sag, your headlights are pointing too far down, you can't see far enough forward. And when you're going over a crown, you can actually lose somebody
Yeah.
on the other side, so you don't want to be too steep. It's not necessarily vehicle geometry as it is safety or stopping distance geometry.
I find now cars coming over the top, the headlights, they're all cut real well now when you're on level, but
Yep.
when they're coming over towards me,
Yeah. That's,
so okay, so you have work to do. Are we? How much more? Are we
So, there are a couple other waivers. So, one of the things, and this is where I just want to make sure. So essentially, we're coming in at about a 6% grade, right? It might
the
be
entry
maybe it might be like 5
correct,
for the first like 40 feet or 30 feet,
right.
and then it goes up a little bit.
Yeah, if you look at that profile, and again, some of this was keep in mind, again, trying to mimic the existing
Yep.
and blend it as best as possible. But what you end up having is you got like a 6.5 in, 5.5 out. We
Yeah.
tried to fit a curve in there as best we can, but even the existing, you can see that dashed line underneath the paving.
Yep.
That's if you were to go out there today and measure, that's what you would find along the proposed center line. So you can see that coming off the driveway, it's steep, probably about a 6% grade, and then it levels out a little bit. It's probably, I don't have the exact numbers, but probably 4.5%. So we tried to
Yeah.
mimic that in between. So there is a little bit of a crown on that I think we can take that out or even curve that down a little bit to be able to accommodate that truck.
All right. And then, so what I'm trying to think about for the board is when we had the last hearing, we talked about, okay, well, maybe we can try to resolve some of these issues with Graves, and then start preparing a decision for the next meeting. This is one of those things that it's like, you make it work or you don't.
Right.
So we're not dealing with such steep grades that something's not feasible. It's just getting the documentation to us showing, okay, we have a situation that then will at least correct, and then we have additional
Yeah.
conditions that basically make sure that, at Binder, we're doing like a test to make sure that we're not getting bound up so that we know come any sort of top course, we're going to be all set. At least a design and then a check inspection type thing. What do you think is needed to then, is it just really dealing with this profile page that would have to change?
It would be the profile page that would change, and it'd probably be about 9 inches to a foot at its most, and that would obviously be reflected in the contouring. Predominantly around, if you go to the top portion of that page, Joe, see that shaded area where the downshoot is?
Yeah.
Intended to illustrate the downshoot. So you see a little stilling basin, looks like a square.
Yep.
It'd be right approximately that area. I anticipate, the most amount of cut. So that might get steepened out a little bit, but we're probably talking very, very small adjustments here. Nothing that would cause the whole. I'm not changing yards and yards of material here.
No, I was thinking about drainage, whether anything changes.
No, because we'd still have the adequate space to maintain the swale on the inside.
Right.
The drainage basin would be unchanged. The spillway and the riprap reinforcing would be unchanged. It's really the fine detailing that goes on right there.
Okay.
And then Jeff did identify, because he said that he couldn't identify where it was requested in the plans as far as bounds.
The monuments, yeah.
Yep.
We updated the waiver list to include
Okay.
that, to be concrete monuments versus the granite.
And then I'm just looking, see. Okay, no issue. No issue.
The only other one was any comment on the cross slope of the turnaround. So again, we're trying to mimic the existing slope at 5%, and
Okay.
he had as 4%. That's a little grading and shimming that can occur if the fire department feels strongly about that turnaround. I think it was comment number 20, Joe.
Oh, okay.
And we have this so that there's no chance of trying to make it a public way.
Well, the intent is to be a private way.
No, but I'm saying long-term, in the decision.
That's how it would be drafted.
Yeah.
Numbers.
Because I'm not giving the town this problem.
Yeah.
Okay, so as far as this item, I'm sorry, did you say that you would be revising things to the 4%?
I really would yield
Or
to the
fire department.
fire department one way or the other. The width of that turnaround, I think, is 20 feet at its narrowest, and it flares out quite a bit more. but the ability to change that is possible. But like I said, we're trying to mimic the existing contours as much as possible.
So as far as what I basically see, that the only two issues end up being that general engineering comment 20, the board needing to discuss the waiver for bounds, and then the entrance at Meadowbrook to make sure that things don't bottom out. Those at least, because two of them deal with fire department, and if they're going to be communicating me anyways, at least I'll be able to follow up with the cross slope just to make sure that that gets addressed. I don't see one way or the other. It's either they accept it or don't, and then the plan, it gets revised to address whatever fire wants.
Right.
So those are I think things that can be resolved for the next meeting. The first and the third, the bound is basically just something that the board has to consider a waiver, being not a public, where then very often, especially when you're dealing with the private development and the way that people find these things is by way of metal detector and all those things, because it usually ends up being overgrown. I don't really have a concern about that, but I know that the board has had a different history, so.
It's,
Or at least mixing and matching, where at the right of way you may want to do curvatures as it meets Meadowbrook and then go internal.
do you want to try to deal with that tonight or down the way?
I can take a stab and then we can just discuss it at the next meeting.
Because, I think you were here when we've had some of those. We've had some before you were here too.
Yeah.
And,
And we've granted some and then we haven't, so that's where.
I think that, I don't have a real good memory right at this second, but I seem to remember being conservative, as you say, sort of in the front area where it makes a difference, but like, out behind through the woods,
Right.
in the conservation land,
Yeah.
whatever it was, we compromised on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And that would be, I don't know whether you can fit a similar thing here,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
okay. So is that all the talking we're going to do on this?
I think so. Because we'd be receiving information for fire and we may need revised plans, my thought is sort of similar to the library, that we continue to the next meeting. I'll start working on a draft, and we'll know when we get into that whether or not these issues have been resolved.
Okay.
Okay. Can you just let me know what your thoughts are with regard to the bounds? I'll put
Yep.
the plans to that too.
Yeah, I'll touch base with you separately on that as far as like some ideas on how to handle that.
Okay.
Okay. You're going to request a
we're looking-
continuation.
Yes.
Continuation to the 10th.
Yeah.
So, on the assumption that the applicant will shortly be submitting a written request, I will move that the board grant the applicant's written request to continue this hearing to Monday, June 10th, 2019 at 7:30 p.m.
Moved and seconded. Discussion.
I second it. You beat me to it.
Oh no, I heard you say it.
Oh, okay.
The way we are
Yeah,
arranged,
ESP.
the way we are arranged right now, with our three members, we have the chair who is running the meeting. We have two members, one of whom will make the motion, one of whom will second the motion.
Exactly.
Pretty safe bet. Well, unless she's, really adamantly, you still should second it for discussion, however.
There we go. That's all we need. We let's just fill the associate planning board member so that when we get to a special permit, you get 4. And then just for the rest of all the other things, just keep it this way.
Right. Okay, yeah, it sounds like.
Makes
a
drafting
plan.
the decisions a lot easier.
I think I'm in the middle of a motion here.
There is a
Joe.
motion on the floor, I believe.
Yes, there is. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So voted.
All right. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Okay,
Yeah.
see ya.
That brings us,
So I did tell them to come for 8:15. So we actually
okay,
made a
we have a
little bit
few
more
minutes.
progress. We can
Well,
talk
okay,
about other
8:15, for,
other stuff.
for Westford. Other stuff. Well, we have staff report.
We are breathing a sign of relief that town meeting is over, and also I personally am breathing a sigh of relief that I had been for this last academic year, September until last Friday, been doing the MMA certificate program in municipal management. That last class was Friday.
In your spare time.
Yeah. In my spare time, weekends, evenings, staying up until 3 o'clock in the morning doing homework. Not fun. We're halfway through interviews for the conservation planner position. Those will finish up tomorrow. I've also advertised for an intern to do work. I've gotten a number of responses. I'm going to start interviewing next week to bring someone on board to start doing things. Hopefully mid June. Finalizing some of the paperwork to officially close on the Grafton State Hospital with DCAM, and also continuing to finalize things with Viewpoint. That's one of the things that the intern's going to help is once we're up and running, end of the month, first or second week of June. There's going to be a lot of refinements with town departments that utilize it, running into problems, trying to correct things. Viewpoint had said that a lot of towns have had success in basically having an intern do some of that work. And so that it doesn't all rely on me to sort of help on that. That's one of the reasons why the person is being brought on, so that as we go forward over the summer, we can try to refine and make sure that any of the kinks are basically taken care of. Open space plan, I had hoped to have met last night, but with all the stuff that's going on, we're going to be meeting June 3rd, looks like, when everyone was available. I have promised CMRPC some language as far as framing how our action plan is going to work, so that's what I need to get to them to make sure that it can be incorporated. And also taking a stab at the responsible boards for implementing, so that when we meet as a committee on the 3rd, basically things are filled in and we can approve, add, or whatever. So I expect by the end of the fiscal year, June 30th, to have us completed with that, and then probably July come in front of planning, conservation, board of selectmen to get necessary approvals. My hope would be for that second meeting in June to at least have a draft that can be shared and sort of go over some of that with the planning board before then having a final document. We're out of our office, planning, including John, economic development. We're going to be doing a survey of MBTA commuters parking at the Grafton commuter lot. Set up a survey. We're going to start putting that on Facebook and all those media and posters down at the commuter rail with a why I'm just now blanking on it because I'm the one that told John to do it this way, to have that QR code. There we go. So that people can, as they're waiting for the train, just scan a picture, start filling that out. Some of the things that we're trying to get a better understanding as far as people's experience commuting, what sort of when they try to get here and what trains they take, what kind of services, if they were nearby to the train station, they may be interested in, and then also sort of in reverse, as they go home, when they typically end up leaving, what their experience with the commute is, if there's any amenities that would be needed, and trying to get their zip code as well. So that's something that we're going to try to, that's going to occur. Those boards are probably going to be installed this coming week, the end of the week, so that we can try to get a couple months worth of survey information.
Yeah. I got an email soliciting input for that, and I started to try to do it. I had problems. The first thing it was, how many times a week or a month do you use it? And there was no zero.
Well, that's because if it's zero, you're not a user.
But it didn't tell me I needed to be a user. It just said we need your input. No, I started
actually-
down the thing, and it was clearly not. It was clearly for people who do ride the train. Not
Yeah, because it
necessarily-
is.
not necessarily for people who might ride the train if something was better.
Yeah. No, that's actually a really good point. As far as capturing that,
Audience, yeah,
so
yeah.
well,
exactly.
it's less than how
yeah. No, but you go
less
on down.
zero is less than 5.
Yeah, but you go down a little further, and how long does it take you to get to the station?
Let's see. Trying to think as far as other things that are going on. Now that we're completed with town meeting, Natalia and I will be going through and working on putting together the packets that then go to the town clerk so that she can send it off to the Attorney General's office to get approved. We have a number of zoning changes, so I have to take all those individual documents and then refine that zoning bylaw and hope that tables and formatting don't get all messed up too badly, and that it's actually legible. So that's one of the other things that will be in the short term, trying to just follow up to town meetings vote. And work is progressing on moving forward with that MassWorks project. The plans were already approved by conservation. Now they're essentially at like 75% for the sewer work. We're negotiating with Afonso, especially now that town meeting passed, to get a commitment for him to start doing the work, to extend it. Part of that also involves negotiations with sewer connection fees to sort of supplement, because there's a $5,000 per unit connection, and that gets to be very expensive, especially when they're going to be building infrastructure that the town would be taking over. So some of that's ongoing, and the last thing, because Jean Poteet and I are probably going to be meeting a couple times over the next 3-4 weeks, just to discuss possible submission of a revised master plan specifically for Grafton Science Park, and maybe relooking at some potential as far as upfront. Our intent is to sort of talk and have some working meetings between the two of us, and then maybe come back June, first meeting in July, to sort of talk in concept about what Tufts and their the real estate company that's working for them, their broker, looking as far as what might work as far as limited development up front, closer to the Route 30, that maybe is more supportive type things, maybe some incubator space, but then also maybe more tenants like a doggy daycare or some sort of animal oriented uses that don't fit totally within that model of the campus overlay. So they've had some internal discussions with their broker as far as maybe some different types of uses that might be more complementary, especially because of people going to Tufts and all that, that might work. We're going to start discussing, try to identify what that could look like, and then come and meet with the board to sort of give an update as far as what could be going, because that could be something for, well, that would require a zoning change. Fall might be a little close, but then maybe for annual the following year. So,
There's a new dean out there.
yes. I haven't met him yet.
We should be having a chance to say hello.
Yeah.
Okay, no minutes.
No, I'll have them for the next meeting. We've had some rather complex issues, and I want to make sure that I have a chance to go through and make sure that they address things that I'd like to see in them, and then we'll send them out.
Okay, and correspondence.
I didn't see anything.
I don't think I saw much in there
The
this time.
correspondence
No,
pretty thin this time.
Now, is that the good news or the bad news? Reports from planning board representatives on town committees and CMRPC. I swear I had something from CMRPC, but I've forgotten now. I've been up there constantly. All kinds of meetings. Anybody else?
The Open Space and Recreation Plan Committee is, as Joe said, planning another meeting on June 3rd, at which we hope to
Yeah.
make some progress, as Joe described. I really have nothing to add to that.
and with library, are you
I can never get to the meetings because they meet exactly when planning board does.
during the construction phase? Is this basically like your, or that, because that was, I guess it was the building committee. Will they still meet during construction and
Oh, yeah,
okay.
but, again,
Yeah.
it's a question of when they're scheduled.
Yeah.
And I've had conflicts each time,
Yeah.
so.
And since it's a planning board rep, not just her, it's,
No kidding,
none
yeah.
of us could do it.
Whichever one of the member of the planning board was the rep to that committee would have the same conflicts.
Exactly.
That
And,
that
and they got their application approved anyway.
Yeah. You're awfully nice.
that does remind me. I'm hopeful. I'm crossing fingers. I did put in for technical assistance grant application for basically looking at that portion of the Upton Street from basically DPW coming to the library as sort of like an eastern gateway, to undergo sort of the same process like we did for Worcester Street and North Grafton Transit Village, as far as gauging community thoughts, ideas as far as DPW, but then also as you come forward, because you do have the library. We are sort of that is the start of the common sort of coming this way. The thought as far as some sort of reuse with DPW, depending on what that is. A couple of years ago, I had the owner of the post office actually inquire what's going on around. So especially because the town parcel wraps around the post office, there's always the potential for something to happen. So I think it will be a good opportunity for the board and the town to have another public engagement process identifying what could happen
I think it'd
as
be
a gateway.
helpful to be sure we understand the wetlands, particularly the wetlands considerations.
Yeah.
Where they actually are and where they impose constraints.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether we're completely clear on the pollution.
There's separate funding that was appropriated to, not necessarily do a tier 1 type analysis, but there is a consultant that is basically doing an environmental assessment of the property. They've been working with DPW to do soil tests where old buildings used to be, or older areas used to be, just to make sure they get a sample of the soils, just to make sure that things are okay.
I seem to remember that there was an issue with fuel tanks, so buried fuel tanks. And that was something that,
Yep.
stuff was done, but I don't remember what. But
Yeah.
outside of the buildings.
Yeah.
Alrighty, well, it's about 1:15. Are we,
Vamped long enough.
I know. Any more dancing that can happen?
tap dance, yeah. Well, are we ready? Well, do we have what we need?
Well, we have our traffic consultant, and we have the applicant's traffic consultant.
Dueling consultants.
Exactly. I wouldn't be surprised if they're just talking in the hall, waiting, thinking that we're hours behind schedule.
Well, can we start this?
Not here yet.
I mean, I'm happy to give my presentation, and Wayne from WDA can come after, or you can wait a few more minutes and see if they can come.
That's fine with me. I have the presentation all ready and loaded. For Tetra Tech, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is,
The applicant's traffic consultant.
Do you want me to stand or sit?
So if you wanted to,
you can do either way,
that's
whichever way
actually true.
is better for you, there or there.
I'll stand.
Okay, tell us who you are.
All right. For the record, I'm Courtney Jones, representing Tetra Tech, the traffic consultant for the applicant. And we prepared a detailed traffic impact and access study for the project, which was submitted to the town in January. So next slide, please. The traffic impact and access study included an evaluation of 4 existing intersections. Can you see those? Okay. So there's 4 existing intersections that we studied, 3 unsignalized and 1 signalized intersection in the site vicinity. We collected turning movement count data in July 2018 to develop the 2018 existing traffic volumes. And then we grew those by 7 years to estimate the 2025 no build condition, which is the future year traffic volumes without the project. So next slide, please. So here on the screen, you can see the 2018 existing traffic volumes, and there's minimal traffic volumes along Church Street. And the next slide, please. So the next step was to estimate the trip generation for the proposed residential development. We used industry standard trip rates published by the Institute of Transportation Engineers and applied it to multifamily housing. And based on that analysis, it was estimated that the project will generate approximately 418 trips on a weekday basis, split evenly entering versus exiting. And during the peak weekday morning and weekday evening commuter hours, we estimated that the project will generate 26 to 32 vehicle trips in entering and exiting the site. Next slide, please. We then applied those trip generation estimates to the trip distribution patterns you see here. We developed these patterns using U.S. Census Journey to Work data for the town of Grafton. And as you can see, the majority of trips travel through the Millbury Street, West Street intersection and continue through the signalized intersection. Next slide. And applying those trip distribution patterns to the trip generation estimates I described, you obtain the project trips. And as you can see, it's nominal increases at any one of the 4 study intersections. Next slide. We then added that to the future year baseline traffic conditions to develop the 2025 build traffic volumes. These were the volumes that we used as the basis to determine the project's traffic impacts. And we used Synchro capacity analysis software to estimate what we call the level of service and queuing results would be at each of the 4 study intersections. For the 2018 existing, 2025 no build, and 2025 build traffic volume conditions. Those analyses indicated ample capacity at all 4 locations to support the project. Next slide, please. So subsequent to our filing of the traffic impact and access study, the town retained MTM Transportation Consultants to conduct a peer review of the traffic study and the site plans as they relate to traffic. And they submitted their comments in March, and since then we've been working with MDM to address all of the comments outlined in their peer review letter. One of the comments was related to on-street parking during Mass services at the adjacent St. Philip's Church. So we actually were able to go out on Easter Sunday, which is presumably one of the biggest parking activity days of the year. So here's a few select images from that day, and as you can see, there's on-street parking that may impede sight distances for vehicles trying to exit West Street from either direction onto Church Street. It may potentially impede emergency vehicle access and may decrease the safety of pedestrians trying to cross the existing diagonal crosswalk at Church Street and West Street. So as a result of that, those observations, we worked with MDM to develop traffic mitigation measures that the applicant could implement to enhance these existing safety concerns. So next slide, please. So the first mitigation measure that the applicant is committed to is to try to reduce travel speeds, which were observed to be, I believe, 8 and 9 miles per hour higher than the posted speed limit, depending on whether you're traveling eastbound or westbound along Church Street in the site vicinity. So you may have seen a similar looking graphic before where the applicant committed to implementing speed radar assemblies in advance of the Church Street, West Street intersections in both directions. What's different about this mitigation plan versus the one you'd previously seen is we, based on our discussions with MDM, developed a much more significant improvements at Church Street and West Street that negate the need for rectangular rapid flashing beacons at the existing pedestrian crosswalk, because we're actually proposing to realign the crosswalk. So if you go to the next slide, please. So the applicant is also committed to trying to enhance pedestrian safety at the intersection of Church and West Street. The preferred option, based on consultation with MDM, is to eliminate the existing diagonal crosswalk and install a crosswalk along the west leg of the intersection and the north leg of the intersection, and to provide ADA compliant wheelchair ramps to the extent possible. As you can see as well, the applicant is also committed to implementing all-way stop control at the intersection. This will enhance sight lines and remove that concern, as well as enhance pedestrian safety. If during the development of the final design of these plans, it's determined that this particular improvement plan is not constructible for any reason, either fire hydrants or other infrastructure constraints, we have developed an alternative plan with MDM that we believe would be able to be implemented. So if you move to go to the next slide. So this is the alternative plan that the applicant is also willing to implement. And that's pretty much it. We believe we addressed all of MDM's comments, as I believe they issued a letter today to Joe. And I'm happy to answer any questions. And Wayne is here if you want to hear the sites at all.
Unfortunately, I only got a chance this afternoon to see your material, and I did not get a chance to see the peer review.
The good thing is that he's here, so he can speak and go
Yeah,
over those things.
But there's like 10 pages of
Yep.
single-space material, which I'd prefer to be able to read. So that's my complaint. I have a couple of thoughts initially. You might go back a slide, Joe, to the
Sure.
to the first. Yeah. I wonder if the area would be better served if you could have the crosswalk across Church Street be on the east side, the uphill side, because I'm thinking that a lot of foot traffic would be involved from the church.
Mm-hmm. So we
I don't,
did.
you know, what do I do from the church? I have to cut a.
Yes, we did try to, we did develop a plan that did a crosswalk across that approach. There's just some existing right-of-way constraints in the southeast quadrant with the church and some minor grading constraints.
You know, I know that that was stated, but I'm not sure that that is going to be a good solution. The other thing is, today I was amazed to see a four-way stop on Church Street. You know, stopping on Church Street. What's the grade of Church Street at that point?
6%.
Which is greater than we allow on a major road, in fact, generally. And that carries important traffic. I'm not sure. I know that we can't make, or we can't be assured here on this board that we could even have that happen. I'm very concerned about that.
In icy weather, that might be.
The grade of the road with the always stop control, you mean?
Well, the traffic, all the traffic that goes up and down Church Street, having to stop there is a concern for me. Considering the slope, you're gonna have, in the wintertime, coming down the hill, you're gonna have risky situation. And any heavier traffic coming uphill really doesn't want to have to stop there, because they're coming up a 6% grade. So anyway,
Yes, I can definitely appreciate your concern. It will enhance safety because they may have to stop anyway, either for a pedestrian in the crosswalk or for a vehicle entering in and out of West Street. So it will also act as a traffic calming measure to slow vehicles down. Right now, like I said, they're going about 38, 39 miles an hour through that area.
someone might occasionally have to stop. Not everybody has a stop every time. Those are two very different things as far as I'm concerned. We can calm traffic by putting stop signs at every intersection. The question is whether it's a good idea to put stop signs here. I really wonder whether the selectmen are going to be interested in doing that, because we're not going to be able to mandate it, and the plan doesn't go forward unless it is agreed to from the people who have the authority to do it. So I think that's a problem.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Wayne Bellick, WDA Design Group. I'm sorry I'm late. I thought we were going to be on at about 8:30. So, but I did have that initial concern about that, exactly as you have. You know, coming down a 6% slope and then coming to a stop. So I guess if I could, through the chair, ask the traffic consultants, is there a way to do this without the stop sign? I mean, is the stop sign a requirement for this type of condition? If it's not, I'm with you on this.
So I'm not sure if you want to weigh in or you want me to. Yeah. Is that okay?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and board members. For the record, I'm Robert Michaud. I'm a principal of MDM Transportation Consultants. Courtney had referenced a peer review that we've done, published in March. I think you've had the benefit of reviewing that. And the upshot of that review really was to focus principally on the intersection of Church and West Street. Our principal concerns there had to do with pedestrian safety. The notion that a new residential development, 57 units, would likely be generating more activity through the intersection to be able to walk to the center. Likewise, we wanted to understand better the notion of what happens during Mass on weekends so that we could properly plan or at least advise the board on potential measures to address parking issues and particularly the ability for emergency apparatus to get to or from this particular development. This development is unique in that it only has a sole or single means of access to it. It doesn't have the luxury of a secondary driveway where if something were to happen, apparatus would have the ability to get to the site in one of two ways. So the applicant's engineer has in fact collected and described data that allows us to consider various measures. There's really two principal objectives. The first of those is to enhance the pedestrian environment, and the diagram that Ms. Jones had pointed to really was a collaborative effort to identify what was feasible within the intersection. We actually started with the notion, Mr. Chair, that the crosswalk would be better positioned on the east side of the intersection. There are property constraints that would preclude that from happening, or at least in a timely way. West Street itself is a private way, and the corner, the north or southeast corner of that intersection, right, the corner that's closest to the parking lot, is actually owned by the Archdiocese, and you'll see on this diagram, if you look at it closely, where the stop paint markings are located, there's a line that is near the P, right, and it continues up to a point and then continues easterly. It's called Sideline Church Street layout. You can see that that entire corner of the intersection is within the Archdiocese property. So the ability to actually get a conveyance of rights to be able to build a crossing at that location would hinge on the ability to get the Archdiocese and any other party that had rights over that portion of West Street to agree.
Yeah, it seems to me that my point was church traffic. People walk to church. I would think that the church might be interested in making it better for their membership.
Right.
And I feel kind of strongly about it.
Yeah, so, and I'm a regular at church on Sundays myself, so I actually took some time to look at what the desire line would be, what the likely path would be that folks parked in the parking lot would take to get to the church entrance. It's not that corner. There's a fairly significant grade differential between the parking area and that corner of the intersection, and it's shown on the street view on the map here, although it's not really in 3D. If you were to park in that lot and go to the church entrance, you're really inclined to use the paved driveway that connects to West Street to get there. That's the path. If you were to build a crosswalk where you're suggesting, it's not aligned with that desire line. It's not the easiest way to get there.
I'm not necessarily worried about the parking lot. I'm talking about pedestrians.
The neighborhood.
People who walk to church.
Sure. So in that regard, the alignment on the west side of the intersection is actually more direct to the church as well. It would only require that someone living in the neighborhood cross Church Street to be able to get to the church building itself, right? So if you were walking down the sidewalk on the northerly side of Church Street, you would cross West Street at relatively flat grade to this crossing, which would align directly to the sidewalk that leads to the church entrance, right? So you'll see in the the west side of West Street.
I'm then confused about the layout.
If we go to an aerial, Joe, it might be a little easier to follow. So with the church building in the center of that aerial diagram and Church Street east to west, right, we know that there's an existing sidewalk along Church Street on the north side of the road, right? That's where Joe's hand is right now. If you were to walk along that path, you could immediately connect to the sidewalk that adjoins the building by crossing on the west side of the intersection.
I'm not remembering it right. Okay.
Right. So that is, from that perspective, a more direct way.
Okay.
Yeah. And it avoids the property impact that I mentioned with the Archdiocese. So working collaboratively with Tetra Tech and the design team, we all looked at the ability to get a crosswalk on the west side of the intersection.
Now, can we point out there where the parking lot people get what they do?
Yes. So with that blue block is the parking lot. So the path that people would use is to walk from the park position down the driveway, cross West Street directly to the church building entrance.
Crossing West Street without a crosswalk.
Correct. Yeah. And that's less of a concern only because the amount of volume and activity on West Street is fairly minimal, and the sight lines to or from any portion of West Street are pretty clearly visible, and it's a low-speed roadway. So we're not so concerned about that, which would predominantly happen on, if they have Sunday afternoon masses here. I think all of the masses might be on Sundays here, actually, if I recall.
Is most of the foot traffic that you're concerned with, especially as far as stop signs and stuff, is that mainly on church services, not just masses, but weddings and, the church services cover funerals and a lot of things.
Right.
So is most of that, or is there pedestrian, did you look at the amount of pedestrian traffic in not during church services?
Right. We know that based on the traffic count information that was conducted, that this is not a high pedestrian volume area.
So it's just during the services at the church itself
Right,
that
but-
we see pedestrians.
Well, even tonight when I went there are pedestrians that cross through that location from the neighborhood generally. Not necessarily on a sidewalk, but our context was, there's going to be a new 57-unit development here, and in today's planning practice, it's good design, it's good philosophy to provide sidewalks and ability to get places without getting in your car. So where this is fairly proximate, it's close to where the town center is.
And a new library.
We would hope that people would actually use this intersection. And when we looked at it, we know that today to be able to cross that intersection is difficult because you've got a long skewed side crossing. It's not ADA compliant. It doesn't have access ramps. If you were attempting to get to that crossing today, you'd actually be confronted by a telephone pole in the middle of the sidewalk. So for various reasons, we think it can be improved to a current standard, so you've got appropriate access ramps, that the alignment can be changed in a way that reduces the length of the crossing from 48 feet to 25 feet, that can be painted and signed so that it's more visible to the motorists as they're approaching it. And the issue really was, how do you do that given the property constraints and the location of various features like hydrants and sewer manholes and things of that nature. So we've identified what is shown as a concept as being feasible, subject to additional engineering work that the applicant would prepare. And that's shown in this red drawing. And what it would require is a minor adjustment of the roadway edge. Right, there's a berm that runs along the north side of the road that would have to be adjusted by a couple of feet, and a new ramp would need to be placed on the northwest corner of the intersection so that, again, for ADA compliance, you can actually get to the other side with a wheelchair or if you're impaired in any way. And likewise, a new crossing of West Street using, again, the ADA compliant ramp structures. So it appears that this is feasible, still subject to more engineering. But back to the chair's comment about always stop and the concerns that you have. So we know that speeds on Church Street are oftentimes a bit on the higher side. And we also know that if you were attempting to make a turn at this intersection, that there are various features that limit how far you can see. Vegetation, trees, occasionally parked cars. And the idea was that this is a low volume intersection, first and foremost. The volumes are relatively well balanced east and west during many hours of the day. The morning is a little higher eastbound. People are going to the town center in the morning. It's about 130 cars or so. But if you look at other hours of the day, there are about 30 or 40 cars per direction that want to use this intersection, and fewer than 10 on West Street, north or south. Right? So the notion of always stop really addresses two things. It addresses the visibility that you have to other cars that are entering the intersection. Everyone has to stop and look and really think about their movement before they go. And secondly, it also requires the stop so that from the pedestrian's perspective, it's an easier crossing, it's a safer crossing. So really, those were the two objectives that were behind the idea of always stop. We believe that the criteria for an always stop are met here, and although there is a 6% grade, We believe there are many instances within Massachusetts where that is in fact the case, where all stop control can be effective. We don't anticipate that this is going to be a scenario where people are sliding down the hill and can't come to a full stop because of a 6% grade. That may be true on a 15% grade or a 12% grade, but the grade here, based on the regulatory speed limits and the sight lines and visibility, will allow this to be signed as always stop and to operate safely in that manner. What it also does is it allows this to function using simpler traffic controls instead of the rapid flash beacons that you'll oftentimes see at crossings. The rapid flash beacon is a pedestrian push button activated feature that literally strobes. It flashes. It's very evident to somebody approaching a crossing location that something's happening. Those are oftentimes used. We don't believe in this context that is the most effective feature. It's an expensive feature, number one. It requires maintenance, number two. Number three, the visibility to the equipment would be impaired by the trees and the vegetation that are in that area. It's particularly on the northwest corner. So this type of design, we believe, will be visible and effective at achieving those two objectives that I mentioned. You are correct in saying that the Board of Selectmen, acting as road commissioners, will have to approve that. Stop signs are a regulatory feature that they need to be approved by the road commissioners, and so there is that hurdle, if you will. To the extent that the Board of Selectmen do not endorse an all-way stop, we know at a minimum you would want to place highly visible crossing with appropriate compliant signs so that people knew in advance of that there was a crossing, right? At a minimum, those static signs are what you'd need. The town, through Public Works, I believe, mentioned that, gee, it would be nice to have a rapid flash beacon here. That's certainly an option available to the town. My view, again, is that the visibility to that equipment may be challenging. The placement of the equipment, given the existing utilities that are at the intersection, will make it challenging as well. So I'm not sure that the placement of that equipment is a simple matter, though the town would be within its rights to have at least have it considered if it as an alternative to always stop control.
I don't, you do vehicle demand estimates.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any estimates of pedestrians? I'm trying to compare how many cars have to stop versus how many pedestrians want to cross.
Sure.
Because it seems to me that it's going to be a disproportional burden, and I think a burden on the police too for enforcing the intersection. I mean, people are, unless somebody's sitting there, people are going to ignore the stop sign, I think.
Yeah,
I mean, they've been driving through it forever.
Sure, and hence one of the suggestions to place advanced stop ahead signs. Right, those achieve two objectives. One is the stop signs themselves act as a traffic calming measure, which is going to affect the speed characteristics. Right, if you have to stop, even if it's a rolling stop, and that could happen as well, it is reducing the speeds through this intersection, which is a safety consideration. The placement of the signs, if it were to happen, could be monitored over time, and they often are. In Marlborough, where we have our office, there was a neighborhood street system that was oversigned, quite frankly. Every 300 feet or so, you'd have another stop sign. People ignore those in that circumstance because they have to, as soon as they get up to speed, they've got to stop again. It's very frustrating. And that's the reason that there are standards and criteria for the placement of stop signs. Right? In this context, the volumes are not really high here, but they're relatively well balanced. And we believe that there's merit to having always stop control. To the extent it is endorsed and placed, it doesn't mean that the Board of Selectmen over time, based on the actual performance of the intersection, couldn't have those removed. That happened in Marlborough. They removed those signs I mentioned. I think it would behoove selectmen to consider it. Again, in the absence of having always stop control, at a minimum, we would suggest highly visible crossing with the appropriate static signs, crossing here, crosswalk ahead. in combination with the other features that the applicant proposes, which is the radar speed assemblies.
Are we still talking about them?
They are still being proposed. I think in the
The rapid flash is a problem, but the radar speed isn't.
no, those are not a problem. There are options for those that can be solar powered or hardwired. Your option. They are relatively easy to install. There's not a lot of infrastructure. You need a foundation base or pedestal to place the equipment on, and a power source, either solar or hardwire. And we, given our understanding of the right-of-way along Church Street, it won't be difficult to place those.
But now, how do all those factors for those not be similar to the ones for the rapid flash?
Well, the speed advisory radars are really intended to give you a heads up on how fast you're really going, right? So if the regulatory speed limit here is 30 and you're going 35, it'll blink and you'll become aware. And these types of signs have a demonstrated ability to, once people are aware, they tend to slow down or at least not speed up. And so they can be pretty effective.
But I don't understand why it isn't a similar assessment for the rapid flash. That's a thing that I would imagine that they could be powered the same way. They would go on a similar base.
Yeah.
They would require maintenance. Both of them would require maintenance.
Sure. Yeah. Again, when you look at the intersection and the location of hydrants, sewer manholes, structures, right-of-way restrictions, visibility based on trees and fences and everything else, it's much more problematic to try to place that type of equipment at the intersection. With the speed radar advisory signs, you have flexibility to locate it at multiple locations along the road, not at an intersection. So if there is a utility conflict, you simply slide the location by 20 or 30 feet and you're all set. So really that's the difference.
Okay, now someone else can go on.
I think you covered pretty much my questions.
I just have a question how all of that would work. I mean, granted, like it was stated, that this was Easter Sunday, and that like any sort of large holiday, you're dealing with number of vehicles that realistically could probably have been ticketed that day. How do you address situations like that where then people for the church historically have been sort of used to just making do and just parking wherever they can find a curb that they can get out on, and then also accomplishing the pedestrian accommodations, especially because cars coming up Church Street aren't then going to have a lot of visibility for those people in the crosswalk outside of having that advance warning, which those signs, at least in these pictures, would probably be obscured by those cars that are in the way.
Right. So relative to the existing crossing, the proposed or the recommended crossing is actually going to be more visible and more functional. But there's another aspect of the review and the recommendation that has to do with parking restrictions. And we believe, based on the surveys on West Street in particular, under the scenarios that were described, this happened to be Easter Sunday, that there is parking that occurs on both sides of West Street. That's not good. For the following reason: if a fire truck needed to get up to one of the residents of West Street or the church itself or this new residential development, it wouldn't be able to do so easily without having folks jockeying cars around, right? So the width of West Street is 24 feet. The effective parking zone for curbside parking is about 6.5 to 7 feet. So what you'd be left with if cars were parked on both sides of the road is about a 10 to maybe a 11 or 12 foot lane to be able to get a rather large vehicle up the road. Even an ambulance might have difficulty. So that is problematic. In the picture that you have on the screen, you can see that the westerly edge of West Street is painted yellow. And we believe that the intention of that is to restrict parking. You shouldn't be parking along that edge. I suspect that if someone's being dropped off for church, they may be impaired, elderly, whatever those issues are, they may be dropped off on that edge, and that's fine. But to park the car for an entire period of time along that edge it's not good practice. And I believe the intention of that yellow is to demonstrate that. The concept here would be West Street is a private way. The town has only a certain latitude in placing regulatory restrictions on private way. But it's in the vested interests of both the Archdiocese and the residents along West Street, and certainly this applicant, to make sure that parking on any regular basis does not occur on that west side of the road for emergency purposes. And we believe that through a joint discussion of the Archdiocese, the folks who live along West Street that perhaps have rights over that travel way, and this applicant, that everyone can come to an arrangement and an agreement that signs would be placed there saying no parking, that while drop-off can still occur, parking during masses or other events at the church really shouldn't be happening. I believe that in most scenarios during the year that the parking lot itself would accommodate the needs of the church. This happened to be an anomaly. Probably the busiest parking activity, even more so than Christmas. And my understanding is that even under this scenario, there were maybe 2 cars or 3 cars parked along the westerly edge. So I believe that there's ample capacity to accommodate those few cars that would be inclined to park there in the lot. It's just a matter of convenience, and people say, gee, it's easier for me to park along the yellow stripe and walk in than it is to park at the parking lot and walk. So I think there would need to be some collaborative, invested discussions that do that. On the Church Street side, we had the applicant run some auto turn analysis to make sure that a fire truck could actually make a turn when this type of parking activity was happening, and the answer was it, again, would be impaired. So the recommendation is to have parking restrictions within 100 feet of the intersection. And I don't think that's an unusual or difficult thing to do. I think it's appropriate in this location to do that. So on a Sunday or during a wedding event or some similar event, folks can respect that. They understand that they really shouldn't be parking there. Right now, there's no restriction and there's no visible sign that you can't, so people do. So that would be the other recommendation. With those in place, we believe that the crossing would be more visible. The likelihood of parking closest to the crossing point would be reduced, and that everyone would benefit, but the Archdiocese, the residents of West Street, and this development by the self-policing, if you will, of the parking restrictions on the west side of West Street.
You said West Street is private.
Correct.
I'm not sure whether I really realized that fully before. Is it private all the way across on the other side of Church Street?
Not on the other side.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm not certain of that, and Wayne may actually have a better answer to that. I know that on
I think we talked about it.
yeah on this side it is private.
It is, Mr. Chairman, all the way through to Millbury.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just bothers me. Who maintains West Street then, the private part of West Street?
It's a great
The
question.
butter? Does the town plow snow?
I've heard that the town does, in fact.
Town does, yeah.
Yeah. So one of the other comments, and this is documented in our very latest letter of today, was that we really want to make sure that West Street is maintained during a snow event for the same reasons that the church, the residents, and this developer would all depend on that being clear on a regular basis. And so that's a question we have as well.
I also want to be sure that the 24 feet width is maintained. Even with town maintenance, our road is down to 14 feet.
Sure, and we've commented on that you know the
In the good parts.
yeah. Believe me, it was the first thing I noticed when I drove up here. I think West Street today as a private way functions adequately for the several residents that use it and for the church. I mean, most activity for the church is contained to the parking lot, and they use a limited portion of West Street to get to that parking lot. clearly, as you travel up West Street, it gets narrower and narrower and narrower. But this applicant is proposing to widen it to a minimum 24-foot dimension for its entire length. And that is sufficient for the number of units that are being proposed in addition to what the church is currently generating for activity.
And all of the abutters are agreeable to having you working on their road.
There, Mr. Chairman, there is an easement along that roadway for road improvements
No,
But,
okay.
To the benefit of whom?
to the benefit of, in fact, it's referenced in the deed to the property,
Yeah.
that to access the property, road improvements are allowed within that easement.
So it's to the benefit of now.
All those-
Now the owner of,
Yep.
okay.
So you're
So
saying-
you can go. Yeah. Go.
Yes, thank you. So you're saying that it's private, the road is private all the way to Millbury
Correct.
Street?
Correct.
All the
It
way to
is.
Millbury. Oh, I
Yeah.
thought you said,
No, all the way to Millbury
Yep.
Street. I picked that up.
From Millbury up to the property. And the easement actually runs onto the properties, his property and the property across the way that he recently acquired.
I think that Joe, speaking to Joe too, I think that this is an issue that really ought to be looked at with the selectmen and the, and the other town departments, because first of all, if they're plowing it and maintaining it, which means they're paving it, the fact that it's a private way is kind of weird. I don't know. I'm a little bit surprised.
Mr. Chairman, that's not uncommon. I know that in a number of communities, when there are Chapter 90 monies for road improvements, a lot of the DPWs will maintain these roads. We did a project in Millbury where it's the same thing. Private road, the town maintained it with the Chapter 90 monies. It's
I don't remember hearing about the town. We don't have that many private roads that this comes up with. But I don't recall any cases in Grafton where they do. The selectmen do decide, I guess it's the selectmen do decide about roads to be plowed. And some they do and some they don't. The ones that they used to, they still do, and the new ones maybe not so much.
So when we had this discussion at the DPW, it was interesting, the dialogue between the project proponent and the DPW. And as Dave said, basically, his guys, his maintenance crew will get out there very early in the morning and be out there. And he said, we may end up plowing the whole thing. Whoever gets there first is looking to maintain that portion. Obviously, when you get onto his property, then he's responsible. But he said the only way for his guys to get to his property is obviously to plow the road. So,
There was one other thing though. Now, if you go to the always stop, that lessens the arguments for the having to have the two crosswalks, because if everybody stops, then you have all the time you need to go across the diagonal.
Yeah, although a 48-foot crossing is pretty long. So for someone who's impaired, and that's how these, you have to think in those terms, where they're going upgrade, right, crossing from the corner from the church to the opposite corner, that's not an easy movement for somebody in a wheelchair or someone who's visually impaired. The alignment of a 90-degree crossing is ADA compliant because it's the shortest crossing available, and that it's intuitive to somebody who's impaired that they're crossing at 90 degrees to a roadway. It's very difficult for somebody who's impaired to understand that they should be crossing at a skew at a location. So with that in mind, that's why this is much more ideal.
This public hearing, is there anybody with any questions or comments at this stage? Well, one at a time, come on down to the microphone. Tell us who you are and all.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Daniel Vallone, Vellone, 51 Church Street. I'm trying to process all this in the moment, real time, so if you'll forgive me. one of the comments that Ms. Jones made was that the traffic study was performed July of 2018. So that's obviously a low volume time of year. It doesn't account for school bus traffic and people commuting to and from schools. I don't know, I'm not a traffic engineer by training. I don't know how that study number is then escalated out to future numbers.
I know
But-
it is.
So it's my opinion that that number may not be representative. I did look at this submission that was posted online earlier today. The volume number, just standing at the bus stop at Church Street with my son every morning, I can count probably more than 20 cars that drive past on a daily basis just in the morning. So I understand that there was a traffic study done. However, it was done not during the school year. I wanted to bring that to the board's attention. Another thing that that came to mind is that this parking lot is not only used for school functions, it's very often used by the public, right or wrong, for summer concerts at the bandstand and the farmers market that is often held in the common. So there is a concern there. It's my opinion, sitting as a member of the public, that the perception of the consultants as they were presenting this evening is that it's only going to be a few isolated instances where there's going to be this high volume situation, such as Easter Sunday. I don't believe that's the case, because the town does use that parking lot, again, right or wrong, for many common functions. It was noted that they visited that parking lot and that intersection on Easter Sunday. I was curious, how many cars did they count in the lot at the church at the time? Because it was of the opinion of the gentleman that a few more cars could get in there. So I'm wondering what the number of cars that were counted actually this Easter Sunday when they did that count were there. Because it's probably pretty easy based on the square footage of the lot to calculate out the number of allowable spaces. So I don't know if anyone could speak to the number of cars that were in the lot on Easter Sunday.
We didn't do an actual park. So in regard to that question, we didn't do an actual parking accumulation count because the main objective for doing the observations for us was to determine the potential impediments to emergency vehicle access, and just regular vehicle access to or from the site.
Is the lot marked with spaces?
The lot I don't believe is marked. If it is, it's very faded. I know vehicles were parked. We did get photos of a lot of angles of the parking lot, and there's vehicles parked diagonally. So, as you mentioned, there could be, more efficient parking configuration prepared. And in regards to the summer counts, that is a very good point. So at the request of MDM, the peer review consultant, we did collect data when schools were in session in May of this year, a couple weeks ago. And any of the increased volumes compared to the July counts were primarily through volume. So we didn't believe they would impact or make any material change to the capacity analysis results that we reported in our January study, and MDM agreed to that in their response letter that dated today.
Those added counts are included in the report that's on the planning board's website.
A follow-up question, actually I had it here as well, but as Ms. Jones pointed out, the purpose of counting the vehicles on the road was for an impediment study. So I was curious, how many number of cars were illegally parked on West Street and on Church Street?
I don't have the exact numbers. We do have photos, so we could count. I want to say on Church Street, Church Street east of the intersection, I want to say there was just a handful of cars, maybe between 2 and 5. You can kind of see it from the photos that Joe's zooming into. Looking to the left, so the eastbound approach to West Street along Church Street, I believe there is about maybe 10 vehicles total parked along the street. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you. So my point in raising these concerns to the board tonight is that it appears that there's insufficient information at this point, because we don't know exactly how many more vehicles could have fit in the church lot on Easter Sunday, and we don't have an exact number of how many vehicles may have been illegally parked along West Street or along Church Street. I would also suggest that we look further north on Church Street. Quite often for many events at the Common, people park in the southbound travel direction on Church Street, which then restricts the available room for traffic flow.
It might be easier to be saying uphill and downhill because
Downhill.
We're calling
Downhill.
it east and west on that.
Downhill.
It's really hard to get
Sure.
oriented.
Traveling from the Common downhill Church Street towards Providence Road 122, quite often in the downhill travel direction, cars will park beginning at the church in the Common down Church Street, which limits the travel width of southbound traveling traffic towards Providence Road. So I think there's a consideration there, and that has nothing to do with the applicant or their development, but it does have to do with traffic volume and the available travel lane if people are going to be doing that for events in the Common independent of this development. My final comment is regarding the always stop control and that proposed plan. And my concern is that I live downhill, southbound of that West Street intersection. And as most people can probably attest in their lives, they've encountered someone who has approached a stop sign, whether they come to a complete stop or they roll through it, they then accelerate because they're late to go to wherever they're going to. Traveling downhill, down Church Street to get to 122, which is a busy intersection in the morning, it's plausible that someone who did stop at an always stop would accelerate from that intersection down to Providence Road. And there are families and children who live along there. It's a bus route. And so there's a concern that putting that particular traffic control measure, while it may retard flow at that particular intersection, may create a traffic safety concern downhill of that intersection for those families. So that's all the comments I have at this point regarding the traffic study.
Okay.
Thank you.
We have someone back there who wanted to.
Hi, my name's Deborah. I live on a private road in Grafton, and I'm thrilled that you guys will be paving it now.
We need to know your whole name
Deborah George.
and where.
I live at 63 Nottingham Road, which is also a private road. So if the town's starting to pave and plow, we're happy to hear that too. Comments. People were talking about pedestrians as far as the church goes. I'd also like to point out that people walk their dogs on these streets. As was pointed earlier, the parking lot is used for parking to get to activities in the Common. So there's a little more traffic than just Sunday mornings, or as you pointed out, if there happens to be a wedding or other event at the church. Mostly though, I did have a question. Since this is a 57 unit market rate apartments, my family has had 2-3 bedroom market rate apartments for years. And most of the tenants tend to be couples with 2 cars. So to me, at 57 units, we are potentially at 75, just over 100 cars. I don't understand why the traffic study says the impact would be 26 cars during peak hours for a development that potentially could have maybe 100 cars. Thanks.
That's perhaps the most asked question on a residential project. And it becomes more clear why those numbers make sense when you consider the timeline in which people actually leave to go to work, for instance. It doesn't all happen in a 1 hour period. It happens on average over a 3 to 4 hour period of time. Some people leave very early in the morning for, say, a 7 o'clock a.m. shift start. Others may leave at a more traditional time, 7:30 in the morning to get to a traditional office setting at 9 in the morning. And some folks might leave after that. Maybe they work in biotech and they stayed up all night doing a lab experiment, right? So there's a variety of reasons why the duration and when people leave work differs, right? And we know even from census data that those patterns are real. They don't all occur at the same time. So at a 57-unit project, if you think about this, 26 of those, or roughly half of those, are all leaving within a common hour, and the other half are arriving or are leaving in shoulder hours, the hour before or the hour after that, right? So it's not all that far off from standard logic. More importantly, if you look at where those numbers were derived from, they're derived from estimates of other similar developments throughout the United States, and there's a very thick book of information and data that supports that. My firm, in the capacity of being a peer reviewer for these, we're looking at the town's interests in this case. We're careful to ask those questions to make sure that the estimated number of trips are actually accurately portrayed. And we have the benefit of having actual data for our own facilities that we've gone on and surveyed. And I can say without hesitation that the national data and the statistics that were applied in this case are very much in line with what we see for very similar projects in Massachusetts. So the numbers don't correlate necessarily to the number of parked vehicles per se. You have to consider the time over which those vehicles would be inclined to actually make a trip. So that's the long answer.
You made me think of something that there's a growing trend, it would seem, for everybody, all the parents, to go park at the school bus stop and wait until the bus comes. This is I never knew about that when I was, but it's getting to be and I'm thinking about West Street and Church Street, because I think we just heard that the bus stop is there. So surely the bus will be stopping there after this is built, if it doesn't do some sort of going in.
Sure.
Actually, I wonder, well, I don't know.
Well, the improvements that are shown here are actually intended to facilitate that. If this is a bus stop location, this crosswalk will better suit the needs of that intersection for that purpose.
But I'm thinking about all the parents parked in their cars.
Sure. So, and I suppose that could happen. I live on a street that's very similar to this in terms of the length of where our house is and many other homes to the bus stop. And in this context, so long as the weather cooperates, many people would be inclined to simply walk their child to the bus stop. I know that happens in my own neighborhood. It doesn't mean that people wouldn't get in their car to do the same thing. That happens in our neighborhood as well. Not as much as the walking trip. But certainly, yeah, I suppose if it's really cold and windy, it might make sense for parents to do that, right? Now, if that happens, there's nothing wrong with that. West Street, if this were to occur from this development headed to Church, has ample ability to stack cars on the east side of West Street. So they could do that without impacting public travel. They're on a private way. It would probably be a modest number of vehicles, and they'd have a better access to an improved crossing location with an area next to that crossing location that could be used for staging the bus. So for those reasons, we would view this as peer reviewer looking in the interests of the town as a benefit and improvement over what currently exists, with the capacity for that type of activity to occur on West Street. It certainly could, and it likely would. As it relates to parking, and I'm very appreciative of the neighbors and the residents pointing out that the parking lot for the church can be used for other events, and that's useful to know. It certainly wouldn't be within the realm of this developer to accommodate that, but certainly what's being proposed for pedestrian crossing improvements wouldn't detract from that. It wouldn't create a problem per se. I don't think people from the parking lot would necessarily walk across West Street to get to a crosswalk. I think they'd probably take the path of least resistance and cross somewhere along Church Street that's closest to where the driveway for the parking lot is. But I don't think it would be incumbent on a private property owner to design to that standard. That's certainly subject to a larger issue, perhaps between the Archdiocese and the town in providing that type of infrastructure. I think the Archdiocese signs actually say this is a private lot. You're not supposed to. I don't think the church enforces that strictly. They could, but I think they're a good neighbor and they allow it to happen.
Yeah, it's going to be a particularly critical problem for the next couple of years, and I think that the Archdiocese is aware that pressures on parking in the common are going to be worse than usual
Sure.
because they're closing the area around the library.
Right.
So, yeah, and things like our July 3rd concert on the Common are just very heavily attended.
Right.
So,
We did ask that the applicant provide local police department crash records because we had the same concerns with the type of activity that was happening at the intersection between masses and perhaps other events, pedestrian activity, bicyclists. So the applicant, in fact, reached out to the police department. They secure those records. There have been no crashes here that have been recorded at the local level. We were surprised, quite frankly. But given what the neighbors have pointed out as activity in the area and what we know happens at the church, although that parking activity does occur today and has for some time, it sounds like, it has not resulted in any kind of a safety problem. And that's the reason we asked for those types of records.
Okay. Is there anybody else? Come on down.
Laurie Wilkins, 65 Nottingham. I have a concern about the four-way stop, especially in the wintertime, going up to church, coming up the hill to the church from Providence Road. It's bad enough that that road is so small when they plow, and then people, of course, still try to park on the side of the road, which is nothing against them. But if you're sitting on that hill trying to get up it with that with that stop sign, I can just see people sliding backwards and having a problem coming up that hill. So I would have a concern about a four-way stop right there, just because of that reason during the winter.
Anybody else? Okay.
So,
yes.
We only have 3 members that can act on this application currently. Hence, at the request of the applicant, we have advertised for a new / continued hearing on June 10th. Depending on if we have people in those seats, we can find out whether or not we need to just, without opening it, just continue it right away, or perhaps we might have 5 or even 6 members on the board by that point. Let's cross our fingers, knock on whatever wood this is. There's a couple open issues on the traffic side. I did forward this information to DPW, our assistant town engineer, police, town administrator. I expect because of the 4-way stop, we're going to have an internal meeting to talk about things and at least to come back to that issue. Because when we had originally met back even November about this, there was discussions as far as best ways to handle that, pedestrian crossings and all that. So that's one issue that we're going to have to follow up on. I'll probably want to talk with the applicant as far as how we then gauge sort of getting input from the Board of Selectmen, maybe after the 10th, but before the next meeting, we can have some sort of discussion, if it's deemed appropriate, with the Board of Selectmen to identify what would be reasonable. But I'd want to follow up first with the staff meeting to sort of go over some of these from a technical standpoint, because if DPW and police don't, let's just say, support a four-way stop, that's basically it. So we'll have that, and I'll contact the applicant so that can have that discussion. We have the other issues as far as today we did from one of the abutters receive that follow-up document that was referred to in the last public hearing as far as a lot of geotechnical information. I'll be forwarding that off to Jeff Graves so that he can review and provide the board with his analysis as far as what needs to be done associated with that information. Conservation, I believe you're meeting with them tomorrow night. My understanding, talking to the conservation administrator, is that they may have resolved some issues prior to when we next meet. So we'll know from a stormwater and resource area impact probably for that meeting on the 10th where conservation is ending up. Trying to think as far as my mental list as far as what are the open items. I did meet with the applicants and the engineer just to sort of talk about taking a closer look at some of the landscaping at the end of the dead end where there's a turnaround, as far as trying to see what can work as far as supplementing that. So I had asked them just to sort of conceptually look at what could be done to change some of the orientation. They basically came back identifying, things may not work, but I know that they were going to continue to look at those items. And lastly, we extended an invitation, myself and the chair of the Affordable Housing Trust, just to meet with the developer, just to follow up to a meeting that to follow up to a comment about, is there an opportunity to work with the Affordable Housing Trust? I'm waiting to hear from some options as far as meeting dates from the chair to then reach out to you and see if we can have a meeting here in Town Hall. So those are some of the open items that we have pertaining to this application.
So it would seem we need a request to continue.
And
I mean, we're re-advertising, but as far as just for the people here, and I think for the process, requests for continuation, and we already have the advertisement.
All right, and we are advertising for the 10th?
Yes.
So presumably we will receive a written request to continue this hearing to June 10th. And on that presumption, assuming that such a request will be received by the board, I will move that the board grant the applicant's written request to continue this hearing to Monday, June 10th, 2019 at 7:30 p.m.
Because
But
Before, well, get a second, and then we can have discussion.
what if I don't want to second it?
But then we just continue on.
Second.
yes,
Well, then the chairman may.
a motion,
second,
ordinarily a motion would die for lack of a second.
but the chairman.
We can last
in
20
dire
minutes on
straits-
that.
What's that? What's that?
So there's a but.
Oh, she seconded it.
Yeah.
Mainly because I've only had a chance to skim through
The stuff.
Robert's peer review. Is there additional, just through the Cliff Notes thing, version, is there any additional either accounts or steps that are needed from a analysis standpoint, in your opinion, that Tetra Tech needs to refine? Or are we basically in agreement on numbers as far as what the potential impact would be? And it's really on the mitigation that looking for input on the town side, or is there something else?
Yeah, the short answer is that we're really, I think, at a point where we agree with their method, the data, the findings. The focal point at this point in time really is the mitigation and the input that the town would have on whether they would support it or suggest something else, and perhaps bounce that off of us. So I think we're good with Tetra Tech at this point. There are some very minor comments that we had on the site plan that I think will be reflected in the final site plan set. We've identified what those are. Yeah.
So everybody's on the same page as far as where we're going from here in terms of meetings that need to be held, information that needs to be developed, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said, we are advertised for the 10th, so there's no question about the continuation date, correct?
Correct.
Story to be further developed depending on what happens to our membership. I mean, we only know for certain.
Perfect storm.
She and I will be here
Yeah.
after tomorrow.
That's true. That's the only
Well,
thing we
that's
know for
right, because
certain.
you're up.
I am on the ballot for
But
reelection.
at least he's on the ballot.
It's-
How is he done?
Hypothetically, it is possible that we will have two write-in candidates, both of whom would get more votes than me. So that's why Bob says that the only thing certain is that these two will be on the board after tomorrow.
Well, good luck, Mr. Robbins. We'd like to have you back.
Fair to say it's highly unlikely that we will have two, unexpectedly popular write-in candidates. We do know of one write-in candidate.
Welcome back.
So in all probability, like 99 points, quite a number of nines, I'll be back. But it's not, strictly speaking, absolutely 100% certain.
Yeah. And for everybody out there watching, there's gonna be two more positions to be filled by appointment, and people are gonna wanna get in here first in line to, put their names in, because this is not working well, but this doesn't work unless we have our full complement.
We need to be at full strength here.
Okay,
So
now,
we have a motion on the floor, I do believe,
this was to, approve the,
Yes.
to
yes.
grant the request to continue, yes.
further discussion. Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, so voted. I don't know of any other matters that may lawfully come before us.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded, not debatable. All in favor? Aye. Opposed, so voted.
Thank you.